that's okay with you. So welcome everyone to our discussion on strategic capacity with the amazing Marshall Gantz, where my name's Gawain Little. I'm General Secretary of the General Federation of Trade Unions. This is the fourth session in the GFTU Educational Trust's strategy series. The purpose of them is to look at strategy across the trade union movement. We hope you'll sign up to the other sessions in this series and indeed the other education sessions that we offered. There'll be links in the chat throughout the meeting. But tonight's session follows on from our last session, which was with Alice Martin, looking at renewing and rebuilding unions and union power in the age of finance. This series is really about getting to grips with union strategy, what it's about, where it comes from. Strategy isn't just a word. We'll be exploring that tonight. Strategy is about how we within the trade union and wider labour movement build power and the capacity to improve workers' lives. It's very clear that the other side have a strategy, and it's vital that we build a united labour movement with a clear strategy to push back. The whole series includes discussions from all kinds of thinkers who I think will prompt your ideas on how you're organising within your own unions, within your own industries, and how we build that united movement and build that strategy together. So as part of that, I'm delighted to introduce this evening's speaker. Marshall is Senior Lecturer in Leadership, Organising and Civil Society at the Kennedy School of Government. He teaches, researches and writes on leadership, narrative, strategy and organisation within unions, social movements, civic associations and politics. He grew up in Bakersfield, California, and went to Harvard College in 1960, but left a year before graduating to volunteer with the 1964 Mississippi Summer Project, which was, I guess, a step into organising first for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and then, and this is one bit personally I'm really interested in, Marshall, from the fall of 1965, joined Cesar Chavez in his efforts to unionize California farm workers and spent 16 years with the United Farm Workers, which those of you who've read Marshall's book, Why David Sometimes Wins, will be familiar with that story. But during that period, he gained huge experience in union, political and community organising and became Director of Organising on the National Executive Board the next 18 years, but then worked with a variety of other mobilisation or organising campaigns. And then in 1991, went back to Harvard after a 28-year break in order to go back and explore, I guess, to deepen his intellectual understanding of that organising work and explore that. Marshall's published a huge number of things in different publications, but the book Why David Sometimes Wins: Leadership and Organisation Strategy in the California Farm Worker Movement was published in 2009, and personally I think it's really groundbreaking. It had a huge influence on me in terms of understanding how it is that unions develop strategy. I know he has other material. I think there's in the chat you can see his latest book and a link there to find out more about it. But I'm really, really excited for this discussion, Marshall. So just to give people an idea of how this is going to work, we're in a webinar format, which means that you can see us, but we can't all see each other. However, we are going to bring people in to chat, to discuss during this call. Marshall's going to open up for, I guess, up to 30 minutes, but see how long you want Marshall to kind of pose initial ideas and thoughts. Feel free to post things in the chat, to post any thoughts you've got. We do have a Q&A box at the bottom, which we'll be monitoring and checking. If you want to put ideas in the chat, do. But if you want to contribute to the discussion, pop something in the Q&A. And what we'll do is we'll unmute you and bring you in to be part of the discussion after Marshall's given his initial opening. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure and privilege to hand over to Marshall Gantz. Marshall, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Gwen. And thank you all for this opportunity to have a conversation this afternoon, I guess evening there, about, from my perspective, one of the most critical elements in this whole crisis of democracy that we're experiencing. Um, because I think organized labor has a critical role to play here, which we can talk about some. But my friend Tom Hayden once said that change is slow except when it's fast. And we are in a fast moment. I don't think I have to convince anyone of that. And over here, of course, on Monday, we began the new Trump regime. And it means that, I guess I've come to think of this not so much as, oh, this is a problem, as this is sort of a rock bottom moment, certainly for my country. And in rock bottom moments, you know that you can't just keep doing what you were doing, that change is essential because otherwise. So what I'm hopeful of is that we can turn this into that kind of opportunity, because the way we've been doing things here has been disastrous. It's been an abandonment of ordinary people. It's been this, galloping economic inequality and an electoral system that we've allowed to become a marketing business, so that it's not people dealing with people. It's actually email. It's more than email. It's just, how can I say, it's treating people as if they were symbols and not real human beings. And that was so clear in this last campaign. So there's a deep need for change. It's going to stare us in the face here more every day. And so, as I say, I think our challenge is to turn this into an opportunity for possibility. I am a fan of the word hope, but not in a, how can I say, not in a hokey way. The definition, I think, of hope as rooted in the words of a 12th century philosopher, Maimonides, who said, hope is belief in the plausibility of the possible as opposed to the necessity of the probable. In other words, it's always probable Goliath will win, but sometimes David does. It was improbable we'd elect a black man president of this country in 2007. It happened. So that hope is it. Optimism and pessimism, from my point of view, are both arrogant because they claim to know the future, and none of us can know the future. Hope, on the other hand, is that place between fantasy and certainty. It's the could be. And that's where the imagination is and the possibility is. So I'm just approaching it from that perspective. I'll say just a bit about the framework that I think of organizing in, and then we'll get to our discussion and to strategy. So if we can start off, I think we have some slides now, and I think, Alyssa, you're going to do slides?
You want me to bring up the slides?
Yeah, let's bring up the first one.
Absolutely. Give me a second. Here we are. Can everyone see?
No, well, I can, oh yeah, wow, it's huge.
They're big questions.
I can't see Gwen anymore. Yeah, okay. Anyway, so I'll talk to the slides because that's what I'm seeing. No, I think of organizing of all kinds, whether it's labor organizing, electoral organizing, community organizing, as a kind of leadership. But I want to explain what I mean by that. For me, it's grounded in these three questions posed by first century Jerusalem scholar Rabbi Hillel. People said, how do I figure out what to do with my life? He said, ask yourself three questions. First, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Not selfish, but self-regarding. In other words, if you presume to lead others, you better be clear about yourself and about your own values and perspectives so you can even see others. The second question he says to ask is, or that he asked is, if I am for myself alone, what am I? Because to be a who and not a what, a human being and not a thing, is to recognize we exist in relationship with others. And our capacity to realize our objectives is wrapped up with the capacity of others to realize theirs. And finally, he says, Ask yourself, if not now, when? It's a caution against what Jane Addams called the snare of preparation. Just into the year strategic planning, we'll have the perfect plan, and then we'll implement, and then the world will totally conform to our expectations. Of course, that's never happened to me. I don't know, maybe it's happened for you. So the point is that for me, leadership is about the relationship of self to other to action. And action always entails uncertainty because we can't know the future. So next slide. So it's a way of thinking of leadership and organizing in a head, hands, heart kind of way. Because once you get that leadership is about dealing with uncertainty, I mean, when everything's going fine, what do you need leadership for? Everything's working fine. It's when the problems, the challenges, often evident by a line outside the office is evident, whatever. That's really when the adaptive and creative and initiative taking dimension of leadership matters. And it can be a challenge to, we ask ourselves, do I have these tools for this new situation? A hands challenge. Can I use my resources in new ways? A strategic challenge, a head challenge. And where do I get the courage? Where do I get the hope? How do I inspire the solidarity that it requires to take risks that are often necessary to deal with real challenges? So it's a way of thinking of leadership in a head, hands, heart kind of way. So the definition that I've come to use, next slide, is leadership is about accepting responsibility or enabling others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. So it is not leadership as domination, it's leadership as empowerment. And it's not leadership as formal positions. We know, I think we don't have to look too far for examples of people who occupy positions of formal leadership, but turn out to be pretty awful leaders. On the other hand, we meet people on shop floors, we meet people in communities all the time that without the titles and all the formal designations of positions of authority, do this work. They accept responsibility for enabling others to work together to achieve common purposes. So that's the spirit in which this is intended. Next slide. Next slide. Now, organizing, I think of as being a form of leadership that focuses first on the question, who are my people? Not what's my issue. Who are my people? With whom am I entering into this relationship? And second, what is the change they need? Not because I think they do, but because it's true to their own lived experience of the pain points and the hurt points. I mean, one of the reasons the Harris campaign lost the election here was they were relying on polls instead of people. It's sort of like, how can I say, a proxy for a human being is how they answer a question. It's not a human being. And the Trump campaign did a better job of actually listening to, it was as if one campaign was trying to tell people how to feel, and the other one was actually paying attention to how they did feel. And so this question of who are my people and what's real in terms of their lives is so important. And I know I don't have to tell you that. I mean, it's just, we've been doing a lot of reflecting of it here. And finally, how can I work with them to enable them to turn their resources into the power they need to achieve the change? So it's not providing services to clients. It's not marketing products to customers. It's not even advocating for people when their own voices can be the most powerful advocates for themselves. So that centerpiece of power is, to me, central to what organizing is about. But it's rooted in, the next slide, it's rooted in appreciation of the role of our people. This word constituency comes from the Latin constare, which means to stand together. So the idea being not clients, not customers, but bringing people together to stand together, learn together, work together, decide together, act together, and hopefully win together. And in terms of power, I found, next slide, that it can be super mystified. But quite directly, if you need what I've got more than I need what you've got, who's got the power? If you need what I've got more than I need what you've got, who's got the power? Maybe we can get a response in the chat. It's pretty intuitive, because if you need what I've got more than I need what you've got, that enables me to use that to generate influence, which is power, to turn your interests into mine and your will into my own. On the other hand, if they're balanced, then together we can create more power in the form of credit unions, co-ops, and all of that. So in other words, for me, power is not something you have. It's something that you create by the interdependence of resources and interests. And I mean, in fact, we live in a world of interdependence, and so power structures are all around and can't be ignored. So the question becomes, how do we find ways to turn our resources into that can affect the interests of those who are using their resources over us to shift the game? And I know that, I mean, that's fundamental to what labor organizing, what union organizing is all about. But it's helpful to think of because it does draw attention to the kind of resources we have. I may have the only food store in town, gives me a lot of power. But then Gandhi comes to town, everybody goes on a fast. I don't have any power anymore because they don't need what I've got. So I find that a helpful way to think about it. Next slide. And in determining whether a campaign is successful or not, I think of it in three terms, not just one. First, did we win? Did we achieve our purpose? But second is, did we come out of this stronger than we went into it? I may be the only person that's had the experience of maybe winning a campaign, but never wanting to see anybody ever again who was involved. I suspect that's not totally unique. So then the question is, gee, we won, but we're weaker. We're not stronger, because unless we're building more power to go on to the next fight, then we're actually weakening ourselves. And finally, are we developing more leadership? Because leadership, from my perspective, defined in the way I'm using it, is something we need a lot of, not a little of. Next slide. And the way we've approached this work then is thinking in terms of leadership and organizing as something you do, as a form of practice. And there's 5 practices that we've found, that we've learned, because I'll just say this, I don't believe in models. When you get down to it, all models are wrong because they're abstractions. And once we start thinking the world is the model and not just the model, just a lens on the world, we get confused. And the economics profession has been living in that for the last 70, 80 years at least. And so it's much more about practices, about how we do things, how we combine our values and our interests and our capacity to accomplish things. And it also requires constant learning, because the world's a changing place, we're changing. And if we think of these elements of practice as practices, then we need to be learning all the time. And so foundational is relationship building, then storytelling, then strategizing, then structuring, then action, and then structuring. And so I just want to go to one more point about this. Can we go to the strategy slide? There's relationship building, next one. Keep going, storytelling, next one. Strategizing, next one. Okay. And yes, so from my experience, strategy is not a noun, it's a verb. In other words, it's not something you have, it's something you do. And so thinking of it that way, I think of it as a verb. Strategizing is turning what you have into what you need, the power to get what you want. And just like every human being builds relationships and tells stories, we all strategize. I mean, anytime we've overslept, had to figure out a different way to get to work or school on time, we were confronted with a challenge, in which we had to figure out how to turn resources we had into the capacity we needed to still get there on time. It may have been a different approach, but we're hardwired for this capacity. And so sometimes it's way over complexified when actually we all do this. And so it's a question of doing it with intentionality and skill. Next slide on strategy. Can we look? Sorry, let's stay with those strategy slides, Alyssa, and go to the next one. The one that's hidden, which we will now reveal.
Oh, the picture you mean?
Yes, yes.
Okay, give me 1 second. One moment.
Acting's important too, but
Acting is important.
yeah, there. I find it, can folks see this? Yeah. I find it helpful sometimes to know where words come from. And the word strategy comes from the Latin word for field, strata. And the army was called a strata because it was deployed to take the field. Now, the general was called the strategos. And so he's up on the hill there. And what he's doing is really developing a theory of change. How is it that if we deploy our troops in this way or that, then we can have a possibility, a probability of winning this effort? The soldiers, the ranks of soldiers in the valley we call tacticas. And this is where we get strategy and tactics. It's the theory and then the activities and how they interact with each other. Now, the problem comes when a cloud settles between the mountain and the valley, because then the mountaintop guy there thinks he's got the whole truth, and the people in the valley think they got the whole truth. And in reality, they need each other. The intimate knowledge of context and detail is critical for good strategizing, but so is the capacity to put it in context, in a broader context, and see how it connects to broader issues and broader realities. Sorry. So it's thinking of strategy in this pretty dynamic way. And what is the next slide? Yeah, that's meant to show how intentional strategy is, but it's not really a very good image because it's a straight line, and strategy is very rarely a straight line. As you all know, it's much more how we navigate through surprising opportunities or constraints and so forth to get to where we need to go. The other thing, and we can go back to the general slides right now. I'm going to come back to strategy in a moment. Yeah, action. Oh, sorry. Yeah, action is the fourth of these practices, and then the fifth is next slide. Is structuring. What are the commitments we make to each other about how we're going to work together, make decisions, hold ourselves accountable, all of that, which sometimes turns into a big problem. And next slide. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. And this is one other element of leadership we find very important, is the danger of leadership that turns out in this way to be a dot. Next slide, in which everything comes, keep going, in which everything comes to that one person. And I don't know if you've ever been in that position, but it's pretty problematic. And it is also for the people who are trying to get stuff done, but there's only one person whose word is the only one that counts. And so sometimes, next slide, we react to that by saying we need no leadership, we need no structure. Then that leads to a chaotic situation. So we've been focusing a lot more, next slide, on developing leadership, next slide, on developing leadership teams or collaborative leadership structures that are interdependent, that are not flaky, but in which the responsibility to lead is shared. Some may be good at strategy, somebody else may be good at storytelling, but it's a way to generate a collaborative center. Then follow, next slide. Then each of those people can build their own team, and then each of those people, next slide, can build their own team. Okay, I want to stop there right now and just say a few more things about strategy with no slides. That okay. Okay, no slides. Back to Guan. Back to, at least I can see one human being. And we can get rid of the slides. Alyssa, your slide is still.
Slides are down, Marshall.
Yeah,
It's-
they're gone. We can't see them anymore.
Oh, now it's gone. Okay, great. Thank you. No, I'm sorry to just sort of rush through that, but on strategy, one of the elements that we focused on a whole lot in my first book and with the farm workers was this idea of strategic capacity. And it's because there's a critical difference between resources and strategy, or I'm sorry, between resources and power. Sometimes we conflate the two. You know, Goliath, see, he's got the shield, he's got the helmet, he's got the sword. Man, David doesn't stand a chance. What's David got? Well, turns out that David remembered that he was a shepherd, and actually he knew how to use a stone and a sling, so he didn't need all that stuff. And so he was able then to turn his resource, his skill with a slingshot into a more powerful weapon than all those resources that Goliath held. And so it's not just what resources you have and how many, it's how they're used. And the creativity involved in strategizing to me is at the heart of it. Because it's not just making a plan, then we're going to do this. Someone asked Eisenhower after the D-Day invasion, General Eisenhower, planning must have been really, really important. He said, yeah, planning was very important, but plans are useless. You know, once you hit the ground and once you're encountering reality, that's when real strategic capacity comes to the fore. And what we found is that, so then the question of who is strategizing matters a whole lot in terms of the combinations of motivation, of experience, and of a context in which they could not be judging each other, but teaching each other. In other words, we're a team, a strategy team is not like, who's got the best idea. We're there to develop collectively our best approach to this challenge that we face. And that becomes a source of strategic imagination and creativity. And that's what came out of that's really what I was arguing in that first book. So that how strategy is done, who's doing it? For example, I was asked to consult County Employees Union in Los Angeles with SEIU a number of years ago, many years ago. And so we would have these sessions. I meet with him and his team, and we come up with all these cool ideas. And then I'd come back, a month later, and nothing had happened. Well, the problem was they were my ideas, not his ideas. And unless the people who are responsible for doing the thing are also the authors of the strategy, it becomes something imposed upon rather than something generated by. And so this whole idea of strategic capacity, which I saw was what was there, that's kind of what the intent of that is. And to try to recognize now, motivation matters a hell of a lot. If people aren't motivated, if they're there just to pass the time or because somebody told them to be in a meeting, that's not going to get you very far. It's not going to be creative. It's just going to somebody sitting there. Having information about the real world, workers' circumstances, what's real out there is critical. And finally, having a way to strategize together, a process that recognizes each person's value, their ideas, that we're not just trying to one-up each other, but we're actually trying to contribute to a common purpose. Those three elements really seem to be in my experience, that's the heart of it. So let me just stop there for now, Wayne, and let's get into a conversation. I hope that's enough to kind of create a foundation.